Hello, listeners of Traversing the Stars. Today's guest is Dr. Travis Langley. You know him from the fantastic book, Batman in Psychology, A Dark and Stormy Night. Now, fellow travelers, come join me as we go Traversing the Stars. Hello, listeners to Traversing the Stars. Today's guest is Dr. Travis Langley. How's it going, sir?
I'm doing all right. You?
I'm doing very well. It's a great pleasure to talk with you. Well, I had the pleasure of reading your current book, the Batman and Psychology book, which I thought was phenomenal. And I wanted to ask, as someone who's definitely seemed like they had a love for comic books, that one right there. I appreciate the plug for everybody who's listening to this version audio. We did see the book cover, and it's very cool. So, absolutely, who's loved Batman comics and comics in general for such a long time. What got you first into comic books? Why do you love them, and why do you like Batman most?
If I could show you the photo of me at age 9 months looking delighted by one of my comic books, you would understand when I say I honestly don't remember.
it was so long ago, or was
asking
so immersed?
When I discovered comic books is asking when I discovered the sun. It's always been there, always important to me. My baby book shows that one of my earliest words, not the first, some people misquote me on that, but one of my earliest words was Batman.
Really?
2 different pages of the baby book say this.
So it's been documented.
Uh-huh.
So I guess at the moment of being a baby, your future was already pretty much laid out that you're going to be connected to Batman forever.
Seems like it. It's just Batman. There we go.
So what is about Batman though that you think grabbed you even at that age? Was Batman back then too? I don't know. Was he still child directed? He's kind of for an older audience slightly nowadays. When you were first reading it, was he kind of still for like a younger audience? Was he still kind of in the darker brooding one that we know today?
I would think it is because of seeing the Adam West reruns when my mom was watching them. I was like, what else is going to grab a 1-year-old's attention like that? But then my dad found the photo of me at age 9 months, just delighted, holding, it was a Green Lantern comic book. I finally figured out, I did a blow up to figure out what it was. Okay, that's Green Lantern. That's Dr. Light. The page is upside down, but I did some hunting to figure out what issue of Green Lantern it was. And then my wife bought me a copy of that particular issue.
Good woman. That's a good woman right there that you have.
But what was it about Batman? All the other things that could have gotten attention. He's somebody who was interesting looking, who was doing activities. It's like, okay, yeah, he would fight the bad guys, but there was plenty of other stuff where people were fighting on TV. My parents would have been watching Bonanza, or when you're 1, they don't necessarily worry what they're watching in front of you, so they'd have seen regular cop shows. But Batman, that look, that manner, Adam West voice, there's so many things there is something about Batman that can appeal to everybody. He's one of the most famous characters on the planet. He's one of the 3 most famous superheroes, and honestly one of the 2. But he is one of the most famous characters of any kind in the entire world. Some of it is going to be the visual. That is just a fact. When you can have a Batman symbol just any old place and get people's attention, when people in the middle of other continents, third world countries, can be seen in. Where do they get that Batman t-shirt? They know something about Batman for the majority of people on the planet. And well, most of them haven't read the comic books. Most of them haven't necessarily seen any specific TV show or film, but the character has this broad appeal for somebody colorful, somebody interesting, somebody who is going to stand up and do the right thing no matter what. Whether you're looking at it in terms of Batman out to help protect people or out to stop evil, that's appealing to all of us. And he can embody our need to see heroes of any kind, anywhere.
I agree with you completely. And I think it's also fantastic about Batman that there's been so many permutations of the character. As you mentioned, the Adam West character, which fans later on, even nowadays, would look at the 60s and going, this made Batman a joke for so many years, blah, blah, blah. But if you think about it, it's like that show has been perfect for young audiences to get into comic books and get into Batman. And it helps to have that younger version that now as adults, they can enjoy the adult version. And there's so many versions of Batman that has gone from the darker, serious versions to the lighter, silly version and everything in between, that it seems like there's a Batman for everybody.
Yeah, Batman, well, the Adam West Batman, little kids did not know there was a joke to it. Little kids, even those discovering reruns many years later, could just see Batman and Robin having heroic adventures. There might be a few things that get your attention here and there and say, that's a little odd. Why does Robin keep saying holy this and holy that? It's like, that's just weird. And even when I was a kid, there was an episode in which Adam West, which Bruce Wayne was thought to be insane, and he got captured by the anti-lunatic squad. And he's in a straitjacket, but then he escapes, and they decide that the rollout of the van has cured him of whatever made him think that the Joker should be vice president of a bank. But when the doctor is testing Bruce's mental health, he taps him on the knee with a reflex hammer. And even as a kid, I thought that was a really strange way to test mental health.
Well, can't forget, wasn't there Batman shark repellent as well that he seemed to have on his utility belt, which is how many times do you need that? But whatever, you're a kid, you'll let it. He did it twice,
or I think 3 times if we include the recent animated movies, the ones he did before he died. He used his shark repellent twice.
Well, Bruce Wayne is a genius. Apparently, only he would know that he would need shark repellent on his utility belt multiple times. That's thinking ahead. That's why he's a genius.
One time it was simply stored in the Batcopter. They had shark repellent or whatever else there was, stingray repellent, and a couple of other things. It's in the 60s. But of course you're going to have a helicopter that can go over underwater. You need things like shark repellent. Batman thinks ahead.
Well, like I said, that's why he's the smartest man in the DC universe. He thought to himself, he had it in the helicopter at first, and he said, you know what, though? I need this on my person at all times, and he moved it. Only he would have done it. Superman never would have thought about it.
Actually, he did not have it on him, but at all times. We're getting into the shark repellent. He pulled it out when he had the surf contest with the Joker. Well, logical. I need to get the bat repellent out of the Batmobile. So he did not have it on him at all times. But he had the canisters at times when he might have thought, of the many things that could happen, maybe I'll need the shark repellent. And actually, because if he'd had the shark repellent on him, he would not have needed Robin to send it down to him from the Batcopter.
Good point. That is a good point. And thank God there was a Robin to do that for him, because that's what his value was. He handed Batman the shit he needed.
I have rewatched that particular scene from the movie many times with my grandson.
Yeah,
he loved watching. He likes to see the Batcopter. Well, one of the best clips with the Batcopter is the one where they go out over the ocean and then Batman's hanging and there's a shark on his leg.
Well, another great thing about Batman, once again, he's great for all ages. I mean, as adults, you still enjoy him, and like I said, there's always something for your grandkids or kids to watch and go, oh, who is that? And then you got them sucked in, it's in their blood, and now you have them a fan forever.
Yeah, Frank Miller made a comment that he saw Batman as the only character in popular culture that can work at absolutely any level, from the darkest to the silliest.
You know what? I would agree. I mean, anytime it's been tried with other characters, like I think they made a darker version of Superman, it doesn't work the same. He loses his character. He's no longer Superman anymore.
Right. He becomes a parody of Superman.
Exactly.
When you go too far from it. Superman can be silly, but he can't go too dark in this. You cannot put Superman in a horror story.
Yep.
You could put Batman in a horror story. With Superman in the horror story, he is this incredible force of nature. So he is not a guy, even if he's in a bat costume, he's not a guy walking around among the horrors and figuring out what to do.
Exactly. And he doesn't have the versatility of Batman and never will. I mean, the closest I probably could come to maybe is someone's like Spider-Man, maybe potentially has that kind of versatility. I know he's been in some stories that were horror-ish,
Mhm.
But once again, it's not the same as Batman. I think that's his genius. So going a little bit more into, so from your love of Batman, you eventually pursued a degree in psychology. When did the psychology interest kick in?
Would have been later in my senior year of high school. Before that, I was thinking drama. I was thinking journalism. Writing has always been there from like third grade on. I always wanted to write. No matter what I was going to do, I was going to write. I was going to write books. I thought it would be fiction instead of writing about fiction. And it's been there. I'm one of the few people I know who got to college and never changed my major. What changed? I did change from wanting to be a psychiatrist to wanting to be a psychologist, because I got to finding that for everything I wanted to do, I could do it as a psychologist and not have to take all that chemistry, which I was okay, but man, it just did not interest me. I dreaded the thought of spending that much of my life studying the chemistry.
Well, you got your doctorate at Tulane University. So how did that experience shape who you became as a psychologist?
I think one thing that would have figured in is my graduate mentor. He studied aggression and violence, and that was a good outlet for my interest in media. It was a good way to combine it with O'Neill's interest, and to work on my master's and my doctorate for the thesis and dissertation, looking at media violence, and specifically cognitive and emotional aspects of our interest in violent material. And so that was there. It was for a long time the professor side of my life and the nerdy side of my life were two different things. My outlet for the nerdy was working on some fiction, and then there was the professor thing. It was a completely different thing. And then there was it was 2007 when it all became the same thing. And there were some world events. I was about to shop around the novel that I'd written, and there were world events that really messed it up. And I don't want to go too far into that, and by the time I figured out, okay, I know how to rework this. But then I got the idea for my Batman book. And when I got it, I thought, I know I can get this published. I know I can get an agent. I know I can get this published. And then that would create opportunities for the other things I want to do. I haven't given up on the novel, but world events keep messing up with it. And part of the novel had included, hey, tampering with a presidential election, and things have happened since then. So, but I've been busy with 13 books since then.
Yeah.
And but when I had the idea for the Batman book, I knew I could get an agent and a publisher for it. And at that point, I had a 3-year plan. It became a 4-year plan because I knew I wanted to get it out with the next Batman movie. And Heath Ledger's death added a year to that schedule, which is okay. During that time, I got to know comic scholars, people in the field, know more about that, get to know that the area of comic studies more, and psychology related to any kind of media. And I got to have experiences such in 2009 when I did a convention panel with Adam West and Jerry Robinson, creator of the Joker, Michael Uslan, producer of the Batman movies. And so the first sentence of chapter 1, Adam West once asked me if I thought Batman was crazy. It was also the first sentence of my query letter to get a literary agent.
Oh, that's cool.
And then I go through it. Yeah, because that right there, it makes the person wonder, was, okay, why did Adam West ask you that? What were the circumstances? How did you know him for him to ask you? Why would you be the person? And then I go in and then give other things about experiences that I'd had at that time, like through the Comics Arts Conference and so forth. And I remember when I got the offer from the agent, after years of not getting an agent for something else, I had an agent in 4 days of this one. I did a lot of research, submitted to 6 agents on Sunday. And actually that went out Monday morning. So they'd have had it Monday. Went on Monday and heard from 2 of them pretty quickly on Wednesday. And he wanted to see my proposal and a sample chapter. I had already written one sample chapter. And then on Friday, I got that email. I still remember that. I'd like to offer you representation. And that's that moment. It's like, there it is. There's that moment. I hadn't had that same feeling since I found out what the fellowship that I'd gotten for my admission into graduate school. It's like those just two very special moments in life. It's like I had that, fellowship to graduate school. I was connected to my future, and I'd like to offer you representation. I didn't have a book deal yet, but I was connected to it at that particular moment, and that was a fantastic experience. I don't know many people. I can say, yeah, I had a literary agent in 4 days, but I'd spent years not getting an agent for something else. I've got to throw that in, so it doesn't quite sound, oh yeah, it was the easy thing. And then when we made the submission, had a publisher within 2 weeks, which is true. But we still went through, even after I got the agent, we did a second sample chapter. So we had 2 chapters. The Which Batman chapter was the second one I wrote, I believe. Yeah, because the first one was the Freud Jung chapter. The psychodynamic duo, or Freud and Jung on Batman and Robin, which I thought I would have more to say about Jung. If anybody out there knows Jungian psychology, you know some things about the hero archetype, the shadow archetype, and so forth. And it seemed pretty obvious how the trickster archetype, certainly, it seemed obvious how these things fit into Batman and his enemies. Then it occurred to me while I was working on it, Freud said a lot about Hamlet. He loved Hamlet. He loved analyzing Hamlet. And it's like, okay, that actually gives me something very solid, not just so speculative. Even the differences between Batman and Hamlet gave me plenty to say. We've got 2 young men who have missions to avenge their fathers. In Batman, he's out to avenge both parents. And Hamlet avenges both his parents by the end of the play. So it's like that right there. And I knew what Freud talked about that. He tied it all to the Oedipus complex and whatnot. Yeah. And I knew I have something objective to say. So that chapter wound up being a little more Freudian than Jungian. I'm not a Freudian or a Jungian, but they're fascinating models for analyzing things such as literature. And so we had that chapter and the Which Batman chapter, which then lets me show the breadth of knowledge. Although for the second edition of that book, yes, right now, going through proofreading the copy before it goes to press for the second edition of Batman and Psychology. Batman and Psychology, A Dark and Stormy Night. The subtitle had popped in my head after things pop in your head in the shower, and it popped in my head right as I was walking away from it, and I laughed, and then I thought, no, wait, there are layers of meaning to that. He is dark. He is stormy. He is the Dark Knight. And I told my wife, she said, you are not calling it that. And we surveyed like 502 people at my university, people I knew through social media. So I had a following in social media then, even before this book came out, not like I do now. But and so 502 people weighed in, and out of the different possible subtitles, overwhelmingly the favorite was A Dark and Stormy Night with a K. Yeah. And so we'll have the second edition coming out in February, 10 years after the first edition. Because there is a lot to say, because I've had 10 years of thinking about it, 10 years of people wanting to talk to me about Batman, people asking me questions about Batman. I've been very grateful that we've managed to veer into some things that I haven't been asked 90 times. So many people want to ask me the same 5 or 7 questions over and over. Of course, you did ask one of them, but it was still fun to talk about. How did you get into it?
I got the other soon.
Yeah. But here we are talking about why second edition. This is one I have not gotten into before, because first one I didn't even talk about it publicly till I knew the publisher had listed something for it online, and I wanted to be pretty far along through the writing in case something went wrong and it didn't happen. I would just be what happened to that second edition? It's like, oh, don't talk about it. But in the last 10 years, okay, obviously there's the media. We have the Affleck version.
Yeah.
We have the TV show Gotham.
Yeah.
We have the TV show Titans, which is not as in people's face as those other two, but it is out there. And there's what we know about Pattinson, and I've had additional time to reflect on even the Dark Knight Rises. at the time I wrote about it, and I was very fortunate in that the person writing the forward to my book was the producer of the Batman movies, so that I was writing speculating on what it seemed to be that the Dark Knight Rises was going to be about, and kind of relying on Michael to give me a nudge if I would. I mean, he wasn't going to be able to tell me things, but at least he was be able to say, no, that's probably not what you should talk about, Travis. At least at that. And likewise with the Batman upcoming. Also kind of just like, you can't tell me things, but at least tell me if I talked about the wrong thing here so I could cut that out. It has been he wrote the forward. He wrote a new introduction for the second edition for me, and he wrote a forward to my Joker book, because after the success of the Batman book, since then we've done 12 anthologies with me as editor and head nerd of the herd. And for me, the Joker Psychology was the sequel to Batman and Psychology. After all these other books, the Joker Psychology, Evil Clowns and the Women Who Love Them. That's the one. I mean, people had asked me all along the way, are you going to want a book on Supernatural? Eventually we did Supernatural. And the other one people asked about more than anything else, are you do one on the Joker? And for a long time, I wasn't sure. Obviously, you could fill a book on the psychology of the Joker, but since we don't know for sure what goes on inside his head, it always felt too speculative to me. It's like I always felt like something would be missing until the publishers published this. She, my editor, and I were having lunch. And by gosh, if your publisher will pay for your lunch, you let them. And the publisher said, well, what do you make about the Joker and Harley? And right there, I knew it's like, well, yeah, even though it's still far more about the Joker, Harley gives us something. We know more about what goes on with Harley. We know what goes on inside her head. And that gave me something more grounded. And I said, even if the subtitle came to me right then, Evil Clowns and the Women Who Love Them, the subtitle can say it's also about Harley, because the Joker and Harley Quinn Psychology, the title's too long. And it would have meant, well, I'd have to emphasize Harley a lot more when, okay, I knew we do have that much stuff to say about the Joker. And then I'm revisiting Batman. We got the media stuff, obviously. We got the movie Joker itself, although that was tied in with the book, The Joker Psychology. And in the comics, some things have happened in the last 10 years. An expansion of the Bat family, new characters such as Duke the Signal. There's some characters I didn't say as much about the first time around because they didn't fit into the structure of the chapters, like one Cassandra Cain. She's one I've seen several people say, why don't you say anything about Cassandra Cain? She didn't fit into the topics. She does very much fit in one of the 2 new chapters. I've got figured out we've got almost 3,000 edits, tweaks from the original book plus the new material, and I had to cut things here and there, and it's like deciding what to cut from your babies, but to make room for new stuff. It's only about 12 pages longer than the original was, which I feel pretty good. I mean, I've added 2 new chapters. They both have to do with issues that have come up in the last 10 years, kind of starting with Nolan and then what people have been publicly discussing. Like, it used to be that one of the first questions anybody would ask me when they knew what I wrote, what kind of things I did, that I talk about Batman, write about Batman, the most frequent question would have been, what's up with Robin? Why that sidekick? For some people, they meant it as a sexual thing, but that question has really been replaced with, why won't he kill that clown? With people debating whether Batman should kill, should not kill. Mark White he addressed it with a chapter in Batman and Philosophy, a very good chapter in that book, and with the book Batman and Ethics. And he and I have some different points of view on this, but he does a wonderful job of outlining different philosophical arguments, both pro and con, on Batman killing. For me, whether Batman should kill or not gets away from the question of why doesn't he? And why do we care so much about this issue? And so I've got a chapter going into these issues, and I have to start up front about, it's in the first year of the comics, kind of the first 2 years of the comics, when they were figuring out the character, that was going on. And then they abruptly said, no, Batman must not do this again. He must not carry a gun. He must not kill. And we can still find a dozen examples in the 80-year history to give us something to argue about there. But he's usually written as someone who does not kill. So when you can easily think of logical reasons for killing, especially the Joker, as Jason Todd does an excellent job of pointing out in Under the Red Hood. And making a strong case. Why not him? He doesn't. It's like not Enigma, not Cobblepot, not Two-Face, but why not the Joker? And in Batman 1, Batman worries that if he starts, he'll keep doing it. Jason thinks that's crap. But this is something Batman worries about with himself. So that is one of. And so I got a whole chapter on his views on guns and his views on killing. It's like, what psychological reasons would there be that somebody wouldn't kill even when they logically ought to? The other new chapter is about Batman's ability to inspire. His ability to inspire others within his own world. That's where characters like Cassandra Cain and Duke Thomas become part of conversation in there. And I was really glad I got to talk about them. And then we go into how Batman inspires in the real world, because for the most part, I don't get into the real world in these books. We've got in Supernatural Psychology, we have a chapter about fandom. But for the most part, we don't analyze the real people. We talk about real human nature. We talk about the science of real human nature, what's known about real people, but through these fictional examples and for a lot of different reasons. And so the latter half of that chapter is about how Batman inspires people in the real world. People who have talked about how Batman saved their life. They say this about plenty of other fictional characters too. Superman saved my life. Luke Skywalker saved my life. Yoda saved my life. I've had a bunch of people say that one to me about Yoda. And the characters and stories and literature and how in the world fiction can save somebody's life. But I had a bunch of Batman examples. Some people mean it figuratively, like horror writer Joe Lansdale, who wrote a chapter in a book. I think it's A Superhero Saved My Life Tonight is the title of the book. But he wrote a chapter about how out of what he saw as the gummy gray world he lived in, Batman brought life to it. Batman and comics, but especially Batman. So he means it figuratively about Batman saving his life. Some people mean it literally. Usually they mean that helped them avoid suicide. Paul Dini, writer for Batman the Animated Series, he has an entire graphic novel about how after a mugging left him physically and emotionally wounded, he was having a hard time recovering. It's like, how could he write about this heroic figure when nobody was there to save him? But then he found himself having mental conversations with superheroes, especially Batman, who became his drill sergeant, telling him not to take that drink, telling him to get up off the couch. So different people have found inspiration from real characters. I think so. It's just the last decade, I've had so many conversations with people, such as repeatedly asking, why Batman? I've had a lot of time to think about it in a lot of different contexts. Like I appear in the documentary Legends of the Night talking about this 5-minute segment about how I teach with Batman, but there are all these other people's stories. I feel kind of out of place when I'm there among, the young woman with muscular dystrophy, the one-legged Dance Dance Revolution champion, people like these who are really using these things to inspire them in their lives. And there I am talking about how I teach. And I've probably talked like 10 minutes straight without you getting a breath.
That's totally fine.
It is an exciting topic when we get to talk about it. And I guess I have managed to veer into some things that I haven't talked about 50 times.
Well, I think the thing I was most curious about when I did read your book was the intention. Is the book a way to teach psychology concepts to those who are not initiated with the concepts of psychology or may not inherently been interested in it? Or was it to talk Batman first, or is Batman the vector for the education?
That's why it's and instead of. It's not the psychology of Batman. It's Batman and psychology. It is both ways. It is as I think the original intention was analyzing Batman. I think that was that first for me. I say that, and then I backtrack to the things that got me thinking about how I should do this in the first place. This stuff started with the psychology and literature course I was teaching. I can give you 9 different things that this all started with, and they're all true. That's why normally when somebody asks where did I get started, I give them one piece of it because it's too many different things. Right before that summer of 2000, I didn't even tell you what all went on in 2007. I just said it started. The book itself, the idea got started in 2007. Somebody in our department had retired, and we had not offered one of his classes, psychology and literature, in a long time. And we were thinking, well, should we put either cycle some of these out, take them out of the catalog, or offer them. I said, well, I would like to do psychology and literature. And traditionally, a lot of that means like Freudian or Jungian analysis of literature. And it's like, well, our English department, we have people doing that. And that's in there. That's certainly part of it. It's a fun part of it. That's why it was the first chapter I wrote. But there is more. And so within that class, I was using psychology to teach absolutely any area of psychology I felt like. We would be talking about stories about mental illness, stories about mental health, stories about mental hospitals, stories about mental health professionals, through some things that are very famous. Some it's obvious. You're looking at One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, either chapters from the book, or when I did psychology and film, we also do the film. There you're obviously, you're overtly analyzing something psychological. Some of it's a little more indirect when you're going through the Robert Frost poem about the road not taken. Okay, that's not overtly about psychology, but it's still talking about things that are very meaningful to human beings. So we're talking about what is meaningful to human beings in that. You talk about developmental psychology, the psychology of growing up, stages of developing morally or cognitively, absolutely any area of psychology. Some, it's a little more of a tangent. Physiological psychology, let's talk about psychoneurology. Or neuropsychology, the more common word these days. It's like, yeah, I could find works on that. You talk about people with Alzheimer's. You talk about people with brain injuries. We did the short story Memento Mori, which written by Jonathan Nolan, whose brother later turned it into the film Memento. And that was a fun way to, I thought we have fun talking about sometimes some horrible things. And the students were learning so much more real psychology than they'd expected to. And so this was in my mind about what a powerful thing analysis of this fiction is, to teach the psychology of real human nature. So that was with me from the very beginning. I can tell you, yeah, it starts with me wanting to analyze Batman, but it's like, no, it didn't just start with that. So they were always there together. And that's why it's and not of in that title.
Well, like I said, I thought it was a fascinating read. And like I said, it did teach me a lot about psychology and the ideas. But I think one of the things that surprised me the most, and I'm sure you've gotten this concept, I know the main concept was Batman crazy, but I think most literature and a lot of comic books approach Batman or have characters react to Batman as in he's just crazy, or Batman is some maladaptive way to deal with the loss of his parents. You come from a different direction, saying he actually is handling it relatively well. I mean, you kind of point out he doesn't have PTSD, at least not the way we would traditionally understand it.
Not a full set of symptoms as he's traditionally written. There are certain points in his career when you have to go, yeah, okay, he had a full set of PTSD symptoms after Jason Todd died. And I've checked with a bunch of other people, a couple of the psychiatrists whom I quoted in this first edition. The DSM-5 came out the year after my book, and some of the diagnostic criteria changed. So I checked back with some of the people I quoted and asked them, do you think with some changes to the PTSD criteria that would still apply? And they still agreed that no. In fact, nobody I know who knows the character well and knows the diagnostic criteria well, none of them say that Batman, as usually written, fits a full set of PTSD criteria. He certainly has some. And you can certainly say in some areas of his life, yeah, he definitely is not functioning well. He's very lonely at times. He drives everybody who's close to him away at times. How can that not be unhealthy? Okay, but we all do unhealthy things. So there's, and you've got to judge people by their own priorities. You don't judge them by ours. You judge them by theirs. And for what his priorities are. What are his priorities? To help people, to stop criminals. And by his standards for what his priorities are, nobody could function better than him. Nobody. We've all been crushed and just unable to keep doing it long. Also, I mean, you look at his entire career, it's impossible for anybody, not just the physical impossibility. It's impossible for anybody psychologically to have 2,000 adventures in the course of his career. what you have to look at is, does he work in the story he's in right now and in the origin that led him there?
Mm.
And then all the rest of it is not weighing on us when we're reading these stories or watching these stories at the time. And so he definitely has certain symptoms, especially reliving the trauma.
Mm.
But we also find that in people who show post-traumatic growth. And I say a little more about post-traumatic growth in the second edition than I did the first one, because I found so many people in the last 10 years have told me that they first heard of post-traumatic growth from this book. They had not heard of it before. It's talked about in psychology more now than it was then, but still there are people who discovered that through the book, and for them, for things that they had gone through, they needed that message. They needed to hear that just because you've gone through trauma, just because you have a wound, that does not mean you are broken. That does not mean you're, or even if you are broken, it doesn't mean you can't become heroic anyway. As there are reasons that, if we go back to that first question, why Batman? Is the reasons. Hard to say a 1-year-old saw this, but we're looking at why Batman appeals to people. We are looking at a person who has decided, I shall become something more. I shall become larger than life. And even if you or I could not quite have the potential to be Batman, it still feels like somebody could. It feels like this person could exist. So even if it's not that we're hoping to be Batman, we're hoping somebody will step up. When we are in the worst part of town, when we walk into the wrong, we walked in the wrong place. This is a scary looking place. And no Boy Scout is going to come save you. But maybe it's like you're hoping one of the roughest looking people, maybe the bartender, will say, "Oh, y'all leave him alone." You want somebody who is wearing that darkness to be able to step up at that moment.
No, I agree completely, and I do think it's interesting that, like you said, according, at least how I understood the book, is that in many ways Bruce Wayne's transition into Batman is an oddly healthy adaptation to his problems
and to the world he lives in. We've got to throw in for the world he lives in. For our world, no. He'd be some lunatic vigilante running around in a cape.
Yes,
we've got to throw in that qualifier. We've got to judge him for the world he lives in. He lives in one really crazy world. But that was my original answer when Adam West first asked me about that. When he asked me if Batman was crazy. Of course, now I'm giving away something from the last page of the book, but now my answer to him, and Adam is, I hate to use a term as crass as this. It's after we've done our panel and we're walking back to the convention center. My students are forming a phalanx around him, so they were his entourage. But Adam and I were just chatting, and he said, "I hate to use the word as crass as this, but it's like, you as a psychologist, what do you think? Is Batman crazy?" And one, I couldn't help but love the fact that Batman was asking me this. But also, not for the world he lives in. We've got to judge him in that context. And I think Nolan was right to, let's have a world that's really grounded. It's still not quite the real world. We don't have this League of Assassins that are tearing down a city. We don't have this blue flower that does these things. So it's we don't have weapons that don't really exist, but we accept that they exist because they hired Morgan Freeman to tell us they're real. So it's not quite the real world. It's close. It helps go into that feel of this could be real. Batman could be real. And you have to look at this. In that case, the more realistic it is, the more you get away from the supernatural or superhuman, superpowers, or science fiction, the harder it is to come up with why would somebody do this in this world. And it absolutely depends. You've got to have a thoroughly corrupt, broken system. There are places in the world where people do need to hide their identities in order to do the right thing. There are people in history who have had to wear masks, have had to wear or carry names, public personas. We're not sure. It's like, okay, who is this rebel leader and so forth? You've got to go that far before it starts to fit. But there are times when there's a reason for somebody to wear a mask. So he has to be in a city that's that broken. In the comics, it was not that broken until Frank Miller made it that broken. But it worked so well.
Well, one thing from a question of morality, you do reference in your book a little bit what was said in the movie The Dark Knight about escalation. Now, from a moral standpoint, can Batman continue what he does, knowing that he is on some level connected to the escalation around him? Is he now more of a problem than he is a help at that point?
And he worries about that. That is going to be an issue anytime we figure in the line when Gordon brings it up. You know, it's like we get armor piercing, or we get armor, they get armor piercing bullets. He's not just talking about Batman, but that example with the armor piercing bullets. That doesn't mean a police officer should just go, oh, well, they're going to shoot me. Why should I bother being a police officer?
Yeah.
So it's like there is the escalation, and it can be back and forth eternally of one-upping. It's like, okay, we've come up with this countermeasure. Now they've come up with their countermeasure, and we've got to keep one-upping it. It is definitely something Batman worries about. He is concerned about these kinds of things. It's in that movie, The Dark Knight, when he's like, I meant to inspire people, but this isn't going the way that I'd hoped. And it doesn't mean somebody shouldn't. You have to be ready for there then will be a response, like Alfred's pointing out to him in the movie The Dark Knight. It's like, okay, and they responded. Now you have to figure out what to do about that. And yeah, when you go, it's like where Batman created these villains, that's not actually what's going on. It's like, okay, he had the guy who either Batman knocked into a vat of acid, or the guy jumped into a vat of acid. The guy who becomes the Joker was a criminal already. The loser comedian version doesn't exactly hold up when you look at the level of monster that he is. It's the person who becomes a serial killer, a spree killer, a mass murderer. You don't get a serial spree mass murderer like we get in comics because of repeated stories. But the person who goes that far is already a horrible human being. They are already, it's like, yes, you may shape the manner which they do these things. The guy shooting up a theater in Colorado was not inspired by Batman. That's the film that was going on that night. He may have colored his hair. It's a different color, but he may have colored his hair because of that. But this is somebody who was already on the path to do a mass shooting. He latched on to some of the aspects. There was a recent stabbing over in Asia. A guy, I haven't looked at it yet. I do need to read the details of this because I'm going to be asked about this one more. He's dressed as the Joker, or he's wearing makeup as the Joker, but whatever it is, he's adopted that. And was he inspired by the Joker to go through with the knife? Odds are no. That this is somebody who was going to do that, and he latched on to this style, this symbol to carry with him as he was doing that. Odds are.
It kind of seems to me that, and I may be wrong, I'm not the psychologist, but it seems to go back to the idea of the connection that people tend to say, kids playing violent video games. Like, well, violent kids are going to end up playing violent video games. It doesn't mean the violent video games mean the violent kids. And it's not a causal relationship.
It's an unprovable question for a number of reasons. Some of it just has to do with the ethics of the kind of research it would take to do that. It's like, okay, I think that this type of video game will turn somebody violent. So what we need to do is take a sample of kids who've never played these games, randomly assign half of them to play them all the darn time, and then see if they go kill people. So this is impractical, unethical, costly, all kinds of reasons why you don't do this research. And so you're trying to get down to pinning it down. So much of the research on effects of media violence. There is a lot of research showing short-term effects, short-term increases in aggressiveness, but we're talking about long-term personality changes, and this has not been demonstrated that way. But then again, is it in an untestable area? And so much of the evidence is correlational. If you want to look at trying to figure out, okay, do violent video games stimulate public violence? So what can we do? Well, what if we correlate the sales of violent video games? See how that, just find out the correlation. Even if you find that violent video game sales are up while or right before public violence goes up, even if you show that correlation, it still could be some other variable causing both to go up. But we actually find is that when violent video game sales go up, public violence goes down.
For like a cathartic reason of they serve.
We could get into speculating on why. Again, it could be something else causing them both, but the fact that it goes down, that's completely contrary to the idea that those games are causing the violence. It's just one example of what we can do to try to piece this apart. It's. I mean, back when I was in graduate school, Dr. O'Neill is my mentor, and he was interested in violence and media violence and television violence. So that fit well with the interests that I had. And I was looking at how people were struggling then to tease apart these complicated relationships. It's part of what makes psychology what we call a soft science. That's not in terms of difficulty. It's in terms of the concreteness of the subject matter and how definite we can be about causality. We are complicated creatures. Even when we go through studying, okay, we can find this influence on behavior. We can find that 87% of people who went through this happened wound up like this. Well, what happened to the other 13%? Why didn't they become that? Often the outliers, the tiny percentages get ignored in the numbers, but they are our best demonstration of the fact that there's still something else going on. And usually there are so many variables influence. We are not like, okay, we put together 2 hydrogens and an oxygen. We got our H2O. That we'll call that water. Well, actually, it was already called water before they knew the H's and the O. But we don't work like that. And we are very complicated. So psychology is a soft science in terms of the abstractness of a lot of what we're studying, and the complex causality that can never fully be pinned down.
Well, like I said, I mean, it's for the same reason why I make sure I'm remembering the title correctly. Seduction of the Innocent, I believe it was called, for the 1950s. That caused the whole comic book in early 50s implosion. Once again, is based on things that can't possibly be verified or studied, because once again, you're dealing with an unknowable series of factors or variables. Oh, you got it.
Yeah.
The classic.
Yeah.
That book has been made famous by how infamous it is.
Yeah. Even before we found out more about Wortham's research, even if he'd been completely honest, and now we know that he wasn't, but largely thanks to Carol Tilly going through his archives. But even if he'd been honest about what he was presenting, a whole lot of what he was saying were things that there are other interpretations of what's going on. Or if you're just working with juvenile delinquents, you don't have a comparable population of non-delinquents. When he makes the comment that, he studied all these kids, and every single one of these kids who went wrong had read comic books. Well, it's the 1950s. They all read comic books. They also all watched baseball. Why don't you say baseball blamed it? He had an example of this one kid who some older kids got him to break into something to try to steal for them, and they offered him candy and comics. And Wortham is blaming the comics. It's like, well, why didn't he blame that candy?
That's right. Good point.
So he's got all kinds of very questionable interpretations of his own research, and he really did research. And then his interpretations on the comics. Now, thanks to Carol Tilly, we know that he told some fibs. He would do things like in the reports the things he reported, he'd give it a story and pull information from 2 different kids and present it like it was one.
Nice.
Or he would do the opposite. He would take one kid's stories and make it sound like, oh, the 8-year-old did this, the 9-year-old do that, when it was really one kid, but he made it sound like it was more kids doing these things, more kids who seemed to be subjected to certain things. So, yeah, even before we found these things out, thanks to Tilly, his stuff was so questionable to begin with. I knew people who still had a lot of anger toward him. I've actually one of the things I had to cut to make room for new material is where I talk about Dr. Wortham in the Batman book. I have these case files on villains at the ends of most chapters, and for
Yep.
one of them, the villain was Dr. Frederick Wortham. But we're 10 years away from them. Not as many people talk about him now. Not as many people know him now. The people whose friends were out of work in the 50s, well, there aren't as many of them now. There's not as much anger about Wortham anymore.
Mm.
Also, in going through and picking apart things that Wortham was saying, so there are a few people who misinterpret me. When I'm talking, okay, he's repeatedly talking about all these things that seem homosexual or homoerotic in the subtext. He didn't say it outright, but he said, at the unconscious level, there's these homosexual things going on in the Batman Robin depictions. And so when I'm picking him apart, some people misinterpret it sounds homophobic on my part. It's like, that's not what the hell I was trying to say. And so there's another reason that I don't need my Wortham thing in there anymore. So that's one of the things I cut was my stuff on Dr. Wortham. I'll probably turn some of it into a blog piece in some of the things that I've cut, I'm going to be putting on my Psychology Today blog. So they're still out there.
Well, one thing I think was very interesting, and I kind of wanted your thoughts on it. Obviously, comic books for a very long time, coming from the 50s, 60s, so forth. For a long time, comic books were viewed as childish or a joke, and were often ignored by
the funny
academics.
Books. They were called
right.
the funny books.
Right, and it was ignored by academia. But over the last 20 years, it has become more and more, it seems like, a source of study and inquiry. What has changed in the last 20 years or so? Do you think that suddenly made people take comic books more seriously and worth studying and and as you said, you teach a class called Batman at Henderson University. Why has things changed to such a degree that people now are actually studying and viewing it as a serious work to, for, like I said, academics?
Several different things. And I definitely have some thoughts on. For me, one of them was when Danny Fingroth had a 2004 book, Superman on the Couch, looking at what interesting superheroes say about all of us. And he had this comment in there about how in the 50 years after Wortham, he didn't know of anybody in the mental health area who'd done a major write-up, a major study or anything on this. So that was another one of the things that was in my head because I read that book in 2007, that same summer that these things were coming. That's among those 9 things that came together that year, was this comment of Danny's about the lack. And then I met Danny and got to be good friends with Danny. He's one of my best friends. But early on, I was mentioning that to him, that was part of what inspired me to start working on this stuff. And he said he had braced himself. Yeah, after he said, it's like, nobody did anything. It's 50 years since then, and nobody in psychology was doing anything with it after Wortham. He said he had braced himself for this backlash of people to say, oh, no, you're wrong. There's this and this and this and this. And there never was a backlash because there wasn't. It was different thing. I think the internet is part of why we're able to talk about these things now. This quick communication, people talking about all kinds of things, people able to share things. The growth of channels, where you have 5,700 channels that you can watch, even before our streaming services. There's so many different things, and there's this search for content, so that there's room for more analysis. There's room for getting into topics that other people weren't quite as ready to get into before. Some of it's just as like, well, we need content, and so there was room. But I think the internet and blogging is a big part of what helps stimulate the dialogue and people sharing ideas and finding it's like, there are a bunch of other people who want to talk about these things. The Comics Arts Conference at San Diego Comic-Con, founded quarter century ago by Peter Coogan and Randy Duncan. Duncan is is a communications professor at my university. And he's part of what got me into these things. By creating the Comics Arts Conference, they created an outlet for people who wanted to study these things. Because before, it's like you could study these things, but what did you do with it? You needed to do something with it. Whether you're publishing in a journal, such as the International Journal of Comic Art, or talk about it somewhere, such as the Comic Arts Conference. So they helped create outlets for people to start talking about these things and share ideas. That was one of that summer of 2007, I saw presentations at the Comics Arts Conference, a conference within the convention at San Diego Comic-Con and WonderCon. And I saw those, and I got to hear people doing these analyses and talk about them, and people inspire other people. It is it's a very weird thing for me to ever talk about. That I've heard people tell me about how my work inspired them or opened paths for them, and there are a couple of different people who I had invited to be on convention panels, and then after the panel, they told me what a surreal experience it was for them being there up with me and others when my work was part of what inspired them on the path that they're taking. And it wasn't not just at Comic Cons. It was a heroism science conference that I was at a couple of years ago. And one of the speakers up there, he said it was so he used the word surreal. That keeps coming, surreal to him having me in the audience when I was one who had inspired him to do that heroism research. So we get to show each other that there's something to do. People who, a high school kid who came up to me during New York Comic Con. I'm being interviewed by a journalist who's dressed as Poison Ivy. And then there's this Sailor Moon Deadpool who stops and just stares off to the side until I'm done with the interview. And it was this a girl in high school who she had used my book to convince her teacher to let her do a topic on a project on a nerdy topic. And I've heard those kind of stories from a bunch of people. So by doing some of this, we're opening the way for other people. And that's related to that question of why does this stuff work at all? Why do we talk about fictional characters? To talk about real psychology. People get different messages in different ways, and for some people, the things going on in real life are too horrible or unpleasant or just uncomfortable to talk about directly. But you can talk about the same thing through something else. Combat veterans who found that people talking about what's going on with characters on The Walking Dead made it easier for them to be sympathetic with people going through trauma instead of just wishing they get over their PTSD.
Right.
I can go on through one example or another, and we're at about double that half-hour length we had talked.
Yes, we did. Actually, I do have a few more questions if you don't mind, though.
I don't mind. It's if I minded, I would have reminded you of the 30-minute mark back then.
30 minutes ago. Well, I did have one question. In your book, and this is the only beef I have in the book at all, is that you make a comparison of Bane to Doomsday, and Bane is such a more complex character than Doomsday. Do you really mean to compare him in that way? Well,
he was created to be Batman's Doomsday. Denny O'Neil said that outright. In fact, somewhere in there, I put quotation marks on something in there. But I mean, Denny and I talked about this. Again, the man who wrote the first comic book I remember having read got to be my friend.
Yes.
And he's one of those people I really miss. So there's certain people who you feel diminished by their loss. And we lost Denny O'Neil and Grant Imahara just a few weeks apart. And, and it was like, man, I feel less cool for them being gone, but so grateful I knew them. So great. I got a list now, and I mentioned the acknowledgments for the second edition. And Michael mentions also at the start we've lost Adam West, Jerry Robinson, Stan Lee, who did his version of a Batman story for DC. Erwin Hazen and Alan Bellman, and just a number of people. But I'm one of these people who will seek out the oldest creators in Artist Alley, because I want to hear from them while I can. I tell people it's a little crass to say, think of it as last chance to see, but think of it as last chance to see. The last couple of years of his life, I visited Erwin Hazen every time I was in New York. And so, I miss these people when they're gone, and so grateful to have known them, especially when you hear one of them refer to you as their friend. That means so much. But so when I talked to, that was exactly what they were doing. Doomsday had really boosted sales by giving Superman his ultimate defeat. So they wanted to come up with somebody for Batman who would give him his ultimate defeat. But Superman and Batman as superheroes are defined by different things. Superman is defined by his powers. He's got his heart. He's got his humanitarianism. These guide those powers in a direction for good. But when you start coming up with a challenge for Superman, you have to come up with what challenges those powers. When you come up with a challenge for Batman, you've got to come up with what challenges him as a person? What challenges his humanity? Bane has to set up a whole lot of things for everybody else to wear Batman out before Bane finally has it. Bane, man, what this guy who wants this big challenge? He hasn't even put it as do a fair fight. Get Batman at his best, not after you've had him worn out by releasing everybody, from the prison. But Bane was created for that explicit purpose. It was like, as a character, he was like, man, he is so unlike. But he was. But aside from that publication purpose, since he's created to be a challenge for Batman, like Doomsday was created to be a challenge for Superman, you're challenging something else.
Well, I agree with you. I do. What I do like about, because Bane is one of the villains I think that over the last, probably in recent memory, became one of the most interesting villains for Batman to fight.
In comics.
In comics, yes, in comics. Unfortunately, there's not been a great movie version.
The movies, at least the last one came closer than the Batman ampersand Robin monstrosity.
Right. Well, I mean, the problem is, I think to do Bane right, it's such a complex story to tell that you would have to do a DC animated multiple part movie to make it work.
And don't make him subordinate to another villain.
Right. I agree with you. 100%. And I think one thing also that I liked about your book is that you did go into the psychology of a lot of these individual villains, and you did give time to Bane. Because I think unlike Doomsday, who is literally just a story plot, that's literally all he is. He's just an entity that exists in the story. And they really didn't bother with him as a character at all. Just he just does. He's a plot point.
Yeah, Bane has reappeared a number of Doomsday has reappeared a number of times, but they've never really known what to do with Doomsday since then.
Right.
He already killed Superman once. He's not going to re-kill him.
Right. And obviously, because once you do that, he hit the pinnacle of what you can really do as a villain, I guess, to begin with in his first appearance. Bane, I do feel like, by stretching him out as a character, by having him appear in, like, I think you mentioned in the book as well, Secret Six and some other things, they made him a actual character. And I think one thing as well that you, by reading all your works, psychology parts of your villain that you went into your case studies throughout your book, I think you really highlighted something that is kind of interesting, which is Batman's rogues tend to be a little deeper, I think, than you find in rogues in other characters. I mean, the Flash's rogues, which are considered one of the best rogue devils, which I never understood, are very relatively shallow characters, while Batman characters all eventually become a deeper study.
Yeah, it's a similar thing with the Doomsday thing with each superhero, his rogues I say his the best known rogues galleries are those of a handful of male superheroes. You ask people out in public, name Wonder Woman's rogues gallery, most of them don't know. No. And there are reasons. Part of it has to do with writers having so much trouble figuring out what to do there. But with the Flash, it's a simple. Okay, you start with what can possibly challenge this guy who runs so incredibly fast. Well, how about a boomerang? What? Okay, cold can interfere with the fast. The mirror, you're playing with things that are fast as light, and some of those other heat even. So many elemental things in most of his villains. And we do have the boomerang guy, but who honestly becomes kind of better known through non-Flash stories. He's not even in the Flash TV series. I think there was a version of him in the John Wesley Ship series, but in the Grant Gustin series, there's no version of Captain Boomerang. He's off in Suicide Squad, and I love what they did with him in the newest one, partly because that actor is a curse on any film he's in. It's true. I hear he's a very nice person,
which is the thing that matters.
Well, it is. It definitely matters. There are people who are better actors than those who get hired sometimes. There are people who are better artists than those who get hired certain times. But it's a matter of who can you stand to work with. And I don't guess I'm going to go too far because we get into stuff that I really know behind the scenes. We're having gotten to know people over the years.
Okay. if you want to actually ever want to share that information, please go ahead and do so. Which I imagine you would get yourself in trouble, but that's okay with me. So one talking about his villains, and it probably is one of the best villains to end with, as you mentioned, the Joker. I really liked in your case study that you brought up when I think is one of the best Batman stories, which is Under the Red Hood, which is the comic book by Winnie, but I thought it was done the best in that TV movie,
animated movie
Under the Red Hood. And
they took all the strengths of Winnick's stories.
Yeah,
they took out the Infinite Crisis stuff, so they took all the best parts and pulled it together as a really nice whole. It is a wonderful story. There's so many people who start telling me about that one, and I have to tell them, yeah, I'd read the comic book before that. Most people don't know it was in the comics. Certain things, step for step, the same dialogue, even, especially the most important stuff. So yeah, it is very well done. A supernatural actor's first visit to the Batman universe as the Red Hood before he's more recently Batman.
Yeah, and I will say, just go as anyone who has listened to any of my interviews knows, I love Supernatural. I do ever get interviews, and it's a great show, and especially Justin Ackles, who one day I will love to interview if that ever happens. But anyways, you mentioned that's the line of from Jason Todd where he's talking to the Joker about his sanity, saying you're far more sane than you want people to think that you are. And then you said in your book that the world's most dangerous people are coldly sane. Now, the Joker, as one of the, at least that world's most dangerous characters, are you insinuating that he is coldly sane and is smart enough to know that you can get away with a lot of insanity? I mean, if you play the part of the insane character, or is he the true psychopath?
Yeah, now we're getting into I mean, he's absolutely a psychopath, but that's a separate issue. He is absolutely a true psychopath. He has no empathy for anybody. He is worse than just calling him a psychopath. It's a combination of other things as well. If it's the whole dark tetrad, he is psychopathic. He is Machiavellian and incredibly narcissistic and sadistic. But insanity is a separate issue. A psychopath could turn insane just as much as anybody else could. It is a completely separate thing. It used to be that if I heard the word psychotic or psychopathic in a movie or TV show, it was 50-50 as to whether they were using the right word or not. They would say psychotic when they mean psychopathic and vice versa. You're psychotic. The person is out of touch with reality. They are hallucinating. They are delusional. They are, and while insanity tends to mean psychotic, you could be psychotic but still be sane. And so, since you read this and you're hitting these parts, the example I use with the elephant, but I will point out that you could be psychotic but still sane. It's if your friend tells you go kill Bob, hopefully it's wrong, you shouldn't do it, and you need better friends. Okay, now if you're hallucinating an elephant and that elephant tells you go kill Bob, okay, if you still know it's wrong, you shouldn't do it, and you need better elephants, you are psychotic, but you are still sane because you recognize the real right and wrong of what you're doing. You understand the rightness and wrongness, even if you're crazy in many ways. The Joker is so far out there, and like I said earlier, we don't know for sure what goes on inside his head, but we do know that he knows that what he's doing is wrong. That's what's fun about it for him. And so he absolutely recognizes almost everybody of Batman's main villains who get sent to Arkham Asylum. The people I know, forensic experts who've done whole things on this. The broadcast thought guys, they've done a lot of writing on this about how it's like these characters repeatedly would meet the criteria for being sane. They would not meet the standards for being found not guilty by reason of insanity, with a few exceptions. Maxie Zeus commits crimes because he thinks he's Zeus. Okay, He's doing the crime. He's not recognizing what he's really doing, and because he thinks he's Zeus. When Jervis Tetch thinks he's in Wonderland and think those blonde girls are Alice and he needs to get them away from the creatures, it's like, let's get her away from that Jabberwock. He's doing that because he's out of touch with reality.
How about someone like Two-Face, who is partially split and one side knows the other side is doing bad, but that side may not?
Both sides know he's doing bad.
Okay.
That's part of knowing, because otherwise he wouldn't know. Gosh, the coin came up scarred. I don't know which to do. He knows which to do. He knows which is the wrong choice.
Okay.
Both sides know. I know I talk a little bit about that. I talk more about the question of multiple personality and why it doesn't usually fit depictions of Two-Face. There are a couple. Snyder had one that I have to bring in here, saying that this is an exception on how he's written. But as Two-Face is usually written, he knows who he is. He does. He's one guy who wants to absolve himself of responsibility, so turn it into 50-50 chance. He wants to do wrong. Even the better part of his human nature is letting that other side do the wrong by turning it into 50-50 chance.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So the one. So how about when we think about going back a little bit to the Joker?
My wife is going to be wondering, how long does this interview? I'm enjoying the conversation.
I appreciate it.
Honestly, I have to turn down most interview requests these days, which is a weird thing to say. Much less it be the fact of it, but I've got to have time to work on other things. I've got to have time to do things. I mean, you asked me about this quite a while back, and we'd set this time now for when I would be past. We're in the proofreading stage, so I'm still working on the book, but I'm past the writing on the new material for the second edition. And it needs to be okay. I think I'll enjoy talking to this person. We can get into some things that are a little different. Or even if we're hitting on the stuff that's different, I'm still connecting it and getting getting responses from you. Somebody who doesn't know this stuff at all and they want to ask me those old questions, I know they're not going to give me an interesting response to then turn it into a fun conversation. So if your viewers, it's like, whatever, we're having our conversation.
All right, fantastic. well, the one thing I thought about the Joker, and like I said, you're the guy to ask. One reason that Batman supposedly puts on that uniform is to inspire others to either lead good or fear some, but part of these also supposed to be that symbol of good on some level. Is Joker's insanity or insane persona a way for him, who may be saying, to inspire others to go down his path of insanity? And so is he knowingly trying to inspire by his behavior?
It doesn't seem to be. It's like when he's had fans who were imitating him that he killed them for imitating him.
Okay.
All right. He wants his face all over. I mean, I can see it's like the movie Joker. You see all these people who are being inspired by Arthur Fleck, that Joker, who's definitely not the same character, and who definitely is psychotic. He is definitely psychotic. He has things that are out of touch with reality. He had conversations with people who weren't there.
Yes.
The entire film, we don't know for sure how much of it is in his head and how much of it is supposed to have actually happened. There are things back from the very beginning of the film, like the way that kids beat him up over the sign.
Yeah.
Some of the movements are strangely similar to the way those guys beat him up in the subway. I kind of think he did not actually get attacked in the subway that way. It's with Michael Uslan, producer of the Batman films, who's just my friend. I saw him the day I saw the movie. I saw him later that day, and first words were out of his mouth were not "hello." It was, "Have you seen it yet?" and Michael immediately, he wanted my thoughts. So he said when we get to talk, just the two of us, and he wanted my thoughts on what was supposed to be real within the context of that story. You have the absolutely unreliable perspective. He's not a narrator, but he's close to it. You have the unreliable point of view character, as is revealed very clearly. Spoilers from a couple of years ago. The character is absolute. I'm not saying which parts are imaginary. There's one thing that's made very clear was imagined. So that character is an absolutely psychotic individual, and he inspires others, but he's not directly trying to inspire them. They just happen to take up this symbolism for the frustrations that they have at that time. They latch onto him as a symbol for what they're doing. And he's either reveling it or imagining that he's reveling in it. That scene in particular, Michael asked, he told me they'd asked audiences earlier, and it was 50 people were 50-50 split on whether that scene really happens. And it's all fiction, but within the context of the fiction, does that really happen in their world or just within his head? It was pretty much evenly split on that one.
That's very cool. And I think one thing I was thinking of as what you're talking about, I don't know why this popped in my brain. I think the group is Anonymous, who copied V from Vendetta with the mask on and kind of used his image. So, I mean, there's obviously indications of people, using that inspiration. But I think it's interesting that the Joker, as you mentioned, so according to you, he is the only one who's allowed to break the norms the way he does it. Though he seems to be for it, though, on some level.
He wants to bring out the worst in people, absolutely. But he doesn't seem to be doing it in terms of wanting to be copied. He wants to bring out the worst that he thinks is already there. He puts his face on everything. He puts his face on other people, but when he's killing them. And there are some stories, especially more recently, in which he's used a version of the Joker toxin that does not kill people, that makes them go insane, such as Duke Thomas's parents. And then that becomes a different aspect of a superhero's origin. A couple of recent ones, we him and another one, it's where it's about the consequences of supervillain influences in their lives. That is why they're becoming the more creative kinds of heroes. And so he is definitely doing things to force people to be like him in those regards. Yes. But he either wants to force it upon you himself, or have you or put you in circumstances that will make you act the worst you possibly could, that will bring it out, not to be him, but to show the evil that he thinks is already in you.
He really is I think one of the great, fantastic villains in the literature. I mean, he's one of those villains that, once again, is perfect for Batman, but when he has broken out from these Batman's stories and moved into other characters as well from time to time, he still functions just like Batman functions, whether or not he's in the Justice League, his own stories or whatever. The Joker seems to function just as well when he's out of the Well, not just as well, but functions well even when he's not in the Batman stories directly.
We don't get as many stories of him with other superheroes, though, unless they're directly connected to Batman, a personal thing. He is still pretty strongly tied to Batman. When you put him up against somebody with superpowers, I was like, and he is the impetus for what goes on with Superman in the Injustice alternate reality stories.
Yeah.
Or something which then inspired like what had happened in the Brandon Routh Superman's background as depicted in the Arrowverse version. Okay, so yeah, so he'll visit other people's stories. He can pop up in someone else's, but he's not going to stick around. One, he's not that interested in them. He's interested in Batman. He is preoccupied with Batman the way certain criminals might be preoccupied with those who pursue them, those who think, oh, I can get something out of this person. But in the real world, it's not even the person who devotes himself to trying to crack the Kodiak case, is not enamored with Zodiac. He wants to solve that puzzle and stop that criminal.
Now, what does it say? About there's been so many writers have written Batman we're going on about 80 years now.
Just over.
Yeah, just over. That Batman, even through 80 years, has still maintained a lot of this similar psychology that you can use to analyze him. Because once again, if it was radically different interpretations over 80 years, you couldn't have even written a book like you did because there've been too many versions to look at.
Yeah, well, that's why the second chapter is which Batman.
Right.
So the Joker psychology, the first one I write is which Joker.
So what does it say that the character of Batman is strong enough that writers have been able to maintain the core aspect of this character so well over 80 years, regardless of which writers are looking at it?
It says Batman resonates with us one way or another. Some part of him resonates with everybody, and can in any situation, we can want somebody to step up and be the hero.
Hmm. Now, when you write, I mean, you like, so you have the second edition coming out February 22nd, 2022.
Yeah, 2/22/22 for the second edition. It's like Two-Face picked the release date.
Or he's going to come looking for you, as he usually does after the number 2. You got to be careful. Yeah. So the thing also with Batman is that the character is going to keep existing 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now. Is that going to require a third, fourth, fifth edition over the time, as he suddenly has changed in media over time in the future to keep up with those changes?
I can definitely see myself doing a third edition 10 years from now.
All right.
There's some things going on in the comics right now that would definitely be worth talking about that I touch on, but don't really get into in the second edition, because you don't know for sure where the story's going yet. Like, Alfred died 2 years ago in comics. And I barely refer to that because, one, it's like he's not affected by that the same way he was like affected by the death of Jason. And yes, he should be very much affected by that. But he's not affected. And there's so many stories with Alfred in them that have been published since then. Because Alfred still has this, you just don't feel Alfred's definitely gone. Jason stayed gone an incredibly long time, 18 years or whatever it was that he stayed gone before Winnick finally brought him back. The same month, Bucky came back.
Yeah.
And if Captain America comics had stayed on schedule, they would have come back the same day. And right now, Bruce Wayne has the Joker stole Batman's money. Catwoman got it back, but put it in Lucius Fox's account, and Lucius is sitting on the money, not letting Bruce have it back. And it's like that. Well, okay, that's ridiculous. It's his money, so that's them trying to skirt around the fact that, like, you don't get to keep something just because it was incorrectly, whatever. But they want the story of Batman without his billions.
Yeah,
and he's leaving Gotham to go tour wherever. So he's depressed. In the comics right now, he's depressed, and it is he's got lost confidence. He's in a state right now. Not all writers are writing him that way, though. So there are these things that are going on, but it hasn't played out enough for me to say much more than to throw it out there and let readers wonder. So I don't really get into that right now. It might mean nothing in the long run. It could be part of them taking him in this big direction for a while. We also have the Pattinson films, plural, presumably coming up, where they're getting into psychological issues with him that have not really been explored before. They're getting into, him having to think about his own anger and aggression, him looking at what the Riddler's doing and thinking, is like, man, I could too easily step over and be that kind of person. I don't want to be that. So Reeves is getting into psychological issues with Batman that they haven't done before. So there's where that can go. There is these new people, these new characters who are inspired by Batman. What will become of them? Duke Thomas is really early in his career as the Signal. And while Cassandra Cain's not a new character, but there are these others. There was the We Are Robin movement in the comics.
Yeah.
That I wish I could say some behind the scenes stuff. Anyway, there was this We Are Robin movement in the comics like 5 years ago, which was a really good story that wasn't as well known as it ought to be. But some of the other characters from it are emerging here and there, especially Duke. And so we could see some lasting repercussions from this thing that was done 5 years ago. So I see some things that are going on for the future that could very much be worth talking about later on, but we need to see them further along in what's happening. Well, and I had more than enough new stuff to talk about than for me to just start speculating on what's going to be done with the death of Alfred and loss of his money and so forth, and leaving Gotham.
Well, I will say when the Batman movie comes out, I would love to have you back on to analyze the movie once I actually get to watch it and see what you thought about it from a psychologist's background. That'd be fantastic. I guess my final question, well, other than, thank you for very much for coming on, but my final question is, when you're reading or watching something on Batman now, do you find yourself watching it more as a fan or as a psychologist studying the new material?
First as a fan.
Okay.
And trying to just watch it as a fan. I still can't help have certain things pop in my head. Mm-hmm. Like when I'm watching The Dark Knight Rises and he gets to the scene with the doctor, and the doctor is talking about the lack of, I was like, you have no cartilage in the knees. I couldn't help but think about Paul Zer's book, Becoming Batman, about the physiology of Batman. And Paul had so many people message him about that part. We were when I was watching Black Panther, at the very beginning of the movie, the subtitle for my Black Panther book came to me. I didn't even know for sure if the movie was going to give us stuff psychologically worth talking about. Obviously, you can pull from the history of the comics and do it, but what does the public want to hear? So you've got to have that movie in there too. But the subtitle came to me when I'm watching the start of the movie. I was like, oh, Hidden Kingdoms. For whatever. So yeah, I can't help it at times. But I try not. And there'll be people who want to talk about some of these things with me while I'm watching. And not right now. I'm not in that mode. I'm not in analysis mode, or I'm not in analysis mode yet. Because I also have to refrain sometimes from saying things that have popped in my head. It's like there'll be once in a while. Sometimes I'll be with one of my sons watching a movie, and I'll point at the screen at a certain point. I don't say anything else. It's just that later on we can talk about why did I point at the screen at that point? Because that was the thing I wanted to talk about, but I didn't want to actually say. I just wanted to make the note. This did not come to me later. It came to me during the movie. So it's first as a fan, but then I'll be going through it as both. I've certain of them I've watched over and over. It's like how many times Rebecca, my wife, has walked in and there's The Dark Knight or Batman Begins playing again. And when I rewatched I forgot that she had not watched the Lego Batman movie with me. So she saw it for the first time. Well, I'm watching it for analysis. And picking. No, the Lego Batman movie is probably on film the best character analysis of Batman ever. Even if things are exaggerated, even if there's silliness, and there are things you go, well, that's not how he normally is. But they look at the exaggerated forms of issues that nobody else had really gotten into. Other films don't really get into the consequences of his loneliness, the consequences of him pushing away the people closest to him. And the importance of others and why it makes sense to have other people in his life.
Well, Dr. Langley, I want to thank you so much for talking with me. It was a great pleasure. And like I said, I look forward to seeing the second edition of your book in February 2022. And like I said, anytime you want to talk about Batman or with the new Batman movie, I would definitely want you on to do an analysis of it. Please come back and talk to me about it.
And for those of you still listening, well, you need to go pre-order Batman and Psychology: A Dark and Stormy Night, second edition.
Okay, is it available on Amazon to pre-order right now?
Yeah, it is listed for pre-order. You just you need to make sure you go for the listing for Batman and Psychology that says no image. The one that does not have a cover image yet. I should see the new cover next week. It doesn't say second edition up there in the title. It has but Batman and Psychology: A Dark and Stormy Night. And look at the release date to make sure which one it is. Or the description says Batman and Psychology returns this new edition. So it's available for pre-order. Last time I looked, the price was down, which is okay for readers, and fine by me. I get paid the same no matter what they sell it for at that level. It's no matter what my publisher sells it to them for. So when they've got sales, the book's 40% off, 50% off of some edition or whatever. It's like, go get it. There was one day when my Kindle edition was at 25% of the price, not 25% off. It was at 25%. I told everybody, go get it. Get it cheap.
Well, at least go ahead.
No, I was going to ramble on that stuff.
No, I was going to say it's worth the read. I found it fascinating only because I, as a long-term comic book nerd and going back now, second generation comic book nerd, going back over 30 years, I like the fact that this character can be taken as seriously as you take him, be able to do that kind of study on it. I think it's great for the industry of comic books. I think it's great for us to really look at comic books as a modern mythology, which is basically what you're doing, giving the same kind of credit that someone in literature would be looking at Greek mythology from how many thousand years ago and doing a study on that. And I think it's also, I think you understand psychology better, as you said, when you have someone like Batman to make the connections for you, because once again, you'll never get into the mind of another individual necessarily. You can't understand necessarily someone who's not you, but you've read Batman, you read the captions, you know what's going on with them. To make those connections, it helps understand the concepts better and helps you understand the character better. And I greatly appreciate that.
No, thanks. Yeah, Michael Uslan, it's after the book came out, and I got talking about why he had originally agreed to do my forward, and what he commented he made when it came out, when the book had first come out, he said, "I'm just glad it was you who did it." And later on, I got to think about, I think that was really cool. And then I got to think about, well, why was he just glad it was me who did it? But he was saying he knew that I knew the psychology and the characters, and that I would take both seriously enough while my love of them clearly shows through. Anybody who's looked at this stuff knows, okay, this is a guy who loves Batman.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would have been really easy. I mean, if we could have easily read that book by someone different, and you would have seen only the highlights hit, you'll see 89 Batman, the Adam West, maybe the new movies, maybe one or two famous storylines where you're like, okay, that is Batman Year One, that is Batman The Dark Knight. And you can kind of tell when someone is just dancing around the highlights of the character. But by reading what you did, you knew, and I figured out very quickly, this guy's been reading Batman pretty closely for many decades. You can see, because some stuff you pointed out, I was like, that's not the regular shit that the cursory look of the character gets you. You know what I'm saying? Like if you kept referencing, like I said, the Dark Knight Returns, I'd be like, all right, well, he definitely picked up the highlights. But when you got into some of those details on issues numbers that I haven't even heard of, and I've been a nerd for a long time, I'm like, all right, that's a Batman fan. He's Batman fan because I never heard of that damn storyline he's talking about. So yeah, it was a great pleasure.
When the idea came to me, I thought the time was right for it too, but and so I thought the idea was, to me, it was so obvious. I was worried somebody else would write it. I knew I needed to take 3 or 4 years to figure out what I wanted to say. Of course, by the time I finally got to writing, I realized I didn't have nearly as many notes as I thought I had, but it had gelled in my head for that long. But yeah, to me, it was so obvious to have a book on psychology and Batman that I was worried somebody else would write it. Or write theirs before I got mine out. And the closest it came, there was a History Channel documentary. It's an episode, a special, that came out the time of The Dark Knight. Batman Unmasked: Psychology of the Dark Knight.
Oh, I think I saw that.
And it's a good program. I did not watch it for 3 years. I recorded it. I kept it on my DVR for 3 years because I wanted to have my own ideas formed first. And there are people who've asked me, well, why weren't you in that? Because I wasn't on that scene yet. I wasn't. Now, if you look Batman Psychology, you're going to find me. But that wasn't the case back when that happened. And it is a good program. And I was really late in the book process. I found a few good quotes that I incorporated. But no, I am very glad that so many people have responded to this book over the years for a lot of reasons. The nerdy kid who didn't have people to talk about some of my nerdy interests once upon a time. The person who is amazed when people call what I do cool. When I was a kid, the word cool and nerd weren't synonymous in any form whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I am the start of the acknowledgments. I think everybody has kept the book popular for the whole 10 years and interested and alive all this time. I'm very happy that it speaks to people, not just for book sales, but for the personal level. It's like this thing that's always been important to me means something to a lot of other people. And then that is very gratifying personally.
Well, Dr. Langley, thank you so much. And like I said, doors always open for you to come back, and definitely let's do this again.
All right.